We prepare for delegate assembly in just a couple of short weeks. Here are a few reminders for our delegates and our alternates. So the recording of the parliamentarian overview that we had, was that last week? I think it was last week. To review Robert's Rules of Order and the standing rules is on the DA webpage. So if you were not able to attend, please go and watch that video so that you're ready for DA and get brushed up on Robert's rules. Delegates vote on the legislative agenda during delegate assembly. The Political Council is offering a legislative agenda forum next Tuesday, October 15th at noon, where you can learn more about what our union has prioritized for the next legislative session. You can find the document as a file on the DA website right before the resolutions. Third, this year we're offering a review for delegates where we're going to run through everything that's going to require a vote during delegate assembly. So that is the standing rules, the agenda, the resolutions, the legislative priorities, the budget. I think that is all that we vote on during delegate assembly. And that is to make sure that you're prepared with all of the information and ready to vote. The review is on Thursday, October 17th at 12 p.m. We'll go through those voting items again at delegate assembly for folks, and it is expected that you have those sort of informational questions asked ahead of time and ready to vote on the floor of delegate assembly. Motions to points of information, if you're not clear on something, are accepted at delegate assembly, but that should be reserved for like new things that come up, new questions that you have. If you have questions now about those resolutions, reach out to the authors or reach out to somebody and get those questions answered now. And then finally, our team has been adding documents that will comprise the DA packet to the portal. Most of the documents will be available tomorrow. Okay, so let's jump in to the resolution forum. The Constitution and Rules Committee has set the order that will take up resolutions at delegate assembly. We have 5 resolutions that will be presented. And all 5 of those will be voted on during delegate assembly. So I'll introduce the title of the resolution, and whoever is here to present the resolution can unmute themselves. After they explain their resolution, we'll pause for questions. So we have allotted a little under 10 minutes per resolution today, so please be mindful of question and answer time to make sure that we get to each one of them. Okay, so first up, do we have that one ready to go? Awesome. First up is the resolution that seeks to allow locals and regions to pay for attorney fees. This resolution passed the MAPE Local 401 leadership team. The lead author on this resolution is Ronald Dixon. So Ronald, there you are. Go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us about your resolution.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Ronald. I'm the treasurer and a steward for Local 401. And I have here today the resolution to allow locals, regions to pay for attorney fees. So if you've been tracking the journey that this resolution has gone through, you'll see that it started out as just literally being like a few words crossed out. It went from being just a few words crossed out in the the financial rules and on the MAPE website to being something that's been greatly expanded based on the feedback I've received from folks at MAPE Central and as well as from other MAPE members, taking into consideration items to ensure that there are no unintended consequences and to ensure that it works, as effectively as possible. Really, and I won't take up too much time here, the ultimate objective here is to effectively allow locals, the local leadership teams, to have the ability to have the ability to either use their to use their funds to pay for attorney fees, or alternatively to have a formal process to request that MAPE Central provide said funds and to pay for it. So the resolution that I offer offers basically an avenue for both. If the local wants to go through that process and to pay for an attorney, they would need to, first, get a vote from the local leadership team, local officers to make sure that there is consensus on that, and then consult with the business agent to make sure that Maple Central doesn't have a legal opinion kind of on hand already, so it's not, kind of wasting money. And then finally, the resolution offers a list of things that the local cannot spend, money on, like, cannot, like, for example, use local funds to like challenge MAPE rules or to undermine the dual structure or to, enforce the collective bargaining agreement, etc. And some of the things that were added there were based on an opinion received from the attorney that MAPE Central has on retainer. And I want to thank Chet for reaching out to him and and having conversation, then relaying information back to me to ensure that this resolution is as strong as possible without, you know, uh, conflicting with the MAPE constitution. So the other avenue, as I mentioned earlier, is, if the local doesn't want to pay for an attorney fee, but still wants to potentially consult with an attorney on a particular issue, then the other avenue brought forth, introduced or allowed under this would be to effectively have a board of director. So the local, union goes to their member of the board of directors to then have them submit a request to the rest of the board to have to allow for a legal fee to be incurred. The board would then have 90 days to approve or deny. And if it's paid for by MAPE Central, then the board of directors would have the authority to basically decide if they wanted to who the firm is or the law firm is, and if they want to be the primary contact, or if they would allow the local to be, the contact, so on and so forth. So basically, if the local pays for it, they would be generally faster and they'd have a bit more control of the process. If MAPE Central paid for it, then it would be then they'd potentially take longer to get approved, and they're in MAPE Central have more discretion over the process. So yeah, and this kind of came about based on the work I've been doing on trying to get a resolution on the situation concerning the taxability of student loan debt reimbursement payments in 2023. But I won't go into great detail there. But I figure, kind of going through that process, that having something like this would be useful. For locals that want to be able to pay for their own like attorney fees to deal with like local specific issues, but also to address situations where a local may want to have MAPE Central provide an attorney and kind of go through the process, how to have a formalized process in place for that. Because right now there kind of really isn't at this point. So, but yeah, so let's see. So with that, and I think, and I just want to mention, I do apologize. What's on the screen right now is, and there have been several versions of this. The current version of this has three additional bullet points of items that would not be allowed for locals to spend on. So the version that'll ultimately bring to delegate assembly will just be a little bit longer than what's on that PowerPoint. So, but yeah, with that, and are there any questions I can field at this point? Concerns, etc.?
Yeah, thanks, Ronald, for presenting that.
Mhm.
Again, if you have questions, folks, please put them in the Q&A or raise your hand. Do we have any questions from attendees?
I do not see any questions at this time.
Well, maybe just a pause and see if anybody throws something in the Q&A. Perhaps Ronald did such a good job of presenting his resolution that there are no remaining questions. Well done, Ronald. If
Hopefully.
yeah, if folks have questions for Ronald about that resolution, please feel free to reach out to him. Suzanne.
There is a question that came into, it's in the chat, unfortunately, but it's from Jenny. And she says, historically, why are locals prohibited from using money to pay for attorney fees?
That is an excellent question, and to my understanding, the reason kind of behind that is, the resources from kind of that would be used to cover like a local issue, for example, would be better. The rationale at least presented was that, it'd be better spent having it go through MAPE Central, kind of like the overarching organization, just so that the legal opinion that's received, the ultimate result, the benefit of that could be shared kind of throughout all of the other locals. And the proposal that I have does have a stipulation that, that the findings would need to be provided to MAPE Central so that you would still have those same benefits. And I think another potential reason, and I wasn't there when this rule was put in place, but kind of just to speculate, I would imagine there probably also was potentially some concerns over, you know, some like issues concerning like challenging other locals or MAPE Central. That's just speculation. But either way, those were the type of things because that was the question that I kind of was asking myself when I was writing that, just to ensure writing the resolution to ensure that I wasn't inadvertently potentially creating a problem or situation down the line that we'd have to fix. But if anyone here has any other history behind it, that I didn't mention or anything I got wrong on that, please feel free to throw it in.
I don't. Maybe it's something we could look for the next resolution forum, or maybe even to give to delegates at delegate assembly, but I don't have any additional context that I can offer, unfortunately. Thanks, Ronald. Do we have other questions?
There is another question that came into the Q&A from Axelina, and she says, my question, are we required to use any specific attorney?
Also an excellent question. Under this proposal, if the local is hiring an attorney themselves and, and not going through MAPE Central to have MAPE Central pay for it, then the local would have the authority to be able to, to hire their own attorney or firm, not have to have one selected by MAPE Central. If the local or region were to go through MAPE Central to have MAPE Central approve and MAPE Central pay for it, then it would be at the discretion of the board of directors. They could choose the attorney. They may choose the attorney that they have on retainer, for example, if they are able to specialize in that particular issue, or they may select an attorney otherwise of their choosing. So really kind of depends. And MAPE Central board of directors could very well decide, if they do pay for it, that they would on a case by case basis provide the locals with the autonomy to still select their own attorney. Even with MAPE Central paying for it. So if the local pays for it, it'd be the local being able to select their own. If MAPE Central pays for it, it would be up to the board of directors.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ronald. I think we're going to move on to the next resolution at this point, but thanks for a thorough presentation and discussion afterwards. Appreciate it.
No problem. And thank you for offering this space to have discussion about it.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. Let's move on to a resolution supporting a ceasefire and divestment in Israel and Palestine. The resolution passed the MAPE Ceasefire Caucus, and the lead author is Michael Yost. Michael, I see that you are here, so go ahead and unmute yourself and walk us through your resolution briefly, if you could, please.
All right. You can hear me? Just a thumbs up or...
Yep, I can hear you.
Thank you. So I'll be presenting on behalf of the MAPE Ceasefire Caucus, which is a group of more than 80 MAPE members who are organizing against Israel's ongoing war in Gaza, which in the last few weeks has expanded to Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. That may sound good in theory, but why is it a union issue? It's a union issue because a condition of your employment with the state of Minnesota requires pension contributions to be deducted from your paycheck. Those contributions are used to fund the war through the purchase of Israeli war bonds and investments in companies which supply weapons for the war. In short, we're paying for it. So I'll say from the get-go, the pension is a wonderful benefit. I hope it will be solvent 30 years from now when I retire and beyond that. But I think a balance needs to be found between pursuing kind of growth at all costs and the human costs of investment decisions. In 2016, the Delegate Assembly voted overwhelmingly to call for divestment from fossil fuels because of their contribution to climate change. This resolution is offered in a similar spirit, that our members should have democratic input on our pension and our money. So onto the text of the resolution itself. Different estimates will give you different numbers, but right now the State Board of Investment manages our pension fund, and these are the statewide elected officers like the governor and the attorney general, and they manage about $146 billion in financial assets. Of that amount, maybe 0.5% is invested in assets which provide material support to the ongoing war. A activist group called the Anti-War Committee put the number at $800 million. But this is more context for the magnitude of the issue rather than like a definitive number we want divested. We want that divestment decision to be made democratically. So if you haven't followed news about the war, its horrific nature is difficult to fathom, difficult to talk about. It's not a pleasant subject. Every day kind of brings some news of some atrocity, whether it's flattening an entire apartment building full of civilians or bombing hospitals or schools or international aid workers famously, or in news from this morning, firing on neutral UN peacekeepers from Ireland who are stationed in Lebanon. And these are old numbers. I updated them 3 weeks ago. The total Palestinian death count has now risen to about 42,000. Around half of the population of Gaza are under the age of 18, they're children. So quite a large portion of that 42,000 is children. That number also does not include the more than 2,000 Lebanese citizens who have been killed since I last submitted revisions to this resolution 3 weeks ago. So that's kind of the urgency of the resolution. Again, these are only direct casualty counts. When you include disease and malnutrition, the number of dead balloons to as much as 10% of the population of Gaza, according to the medical study reference here. Speaking of malnutrition, Israel has maintained a complete siege of Gaza. The Israeli military has total control over the flow of food, water, electricity, fuel, medicine into Gaza. Civilians are facing famine conditions because of it. This fact, along with the apparently intentional targeting attacks against civilians, has prompted the International Criminal Court to seek war crimes charges against the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Israel. The last year has also seen 2 International Court of Justice decisions against the Israeli government's conduct in the war, as well as their occupation of Palestinian territory since 1967. That's the longest lasting military occupation since World War II. So the legal situation has rapidly changed, and so I think it's a question not of if, but when legal sanctions are imposed on investments in Israel specifically. Let's see, the next kind of section of the resolution gives precedence. The SBI voted in 1985 to divest from apartheid South Africa. That government maintained a legal system of segregation and white supremacy for decades. So the SBI has the power to divest, but it could also happen from a legislative decision, like in 2022, when Minnesota passed a law to divest from Russia when they invaded Ukraine. So basically, at bottom, divestment just means we're selling off assets. The SBI would sell off assets and then use the money from selling those assets to invest in other assets that are not, weapons companies and war bonds. If legal sanctions are imposed on Israel and American arms suppliers, those assets are going to be a lot harder to sell. And if we can sell them, we'll receive much lower prices for them. So, as much as this is driven by kind of ethical concerns, we should also be aware of investment risks that are ongoing for these assets. The resolution also mentions kind of Israeli and Palestinian trade unions, labor unions, their stances on ceasefire and divestment. Palestinian trade unions support both. Israeli trade unions have conducted a general strike early in September to demand a ceasefire so that hostages that have been kidnapped by Hamas could be released. A demand that I personally sympathize and support. People should be reunited with their friends and family. So what do we do about all this? The MAPE board of directors already signed on in July to a national ceasefire petition supported by a variety of unions across the country. Our caucus would like to see that decision communicated first to our members to produce democratic deliberation and buy-in. But we also want our stance communicated to the SBI because they should know the union's position if we want to pressure them and change course. We also want MAPE to support divestment of our pensions from this war and from Israeli war bonds. The divestment language in the resolution is intended to kind of offer a framework for for our political position. It's not an exhaustive list of every company we want to divest from. It specifically says we should divest from entities that commission or support violations of human rights and international law. So we also call for a task force that would implement these goals. It would offer advice for any statement that our union issues. It could draft legislative language. It could drop a specific list of divestment targets. It would analyze our pension's financial position on these assets, and it would encourage other unions to take a stand on this issue. So those are tasks that I think are best served by a committee. The DA is a broad decision-making body, but it's not suited to spend hours individually debating amendments about whether we should divest from Boeing or Lockheed Martin specifically, or whichever specific company. The goal is just to provide criteria for how we want the decisions to be made, and we leave the technical decisions to the task force and the board of directors. The resolution would be binding on our union, not on the SBI. The SBI is established by statute. It manages pensions for all public workers in Minnesota, including teachers, firefighters, police, municipal workers, county workers, and so on. MAPE is a big player, but we're not the only player. If we want divestment, we'll need to build a political coalition to make that happen. Finally, the resolution calls for any of MAPE's own money that are invested in these assets to be divested. To my knowledge, we do not have any investments in Israel or weapons companies, but we want to put our money where our mouth is, and we want our union to be on the right side of history. So I'm open for any questions you might have. If you want to talk one-on-one, I'll put my email address in the Q&A section, or you can just like bother me on Teams, and I will probably be able to answer you pretty quickly. But if you have questions that you think the group could benefit from hearing, I'll try to answer them now.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
If folks have questions, again, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. It sounds like we have a couple questions. Remember, we are not debating the merits of resolutions here. We are asking questions that we need clarification on. Go ahead.
Alana says that she has to leave. Is there, other than the website, is there somewhere else that they should obtain this information? The resolutions have been posted to both the website, and they will be making their way, if they haven't already, to the portal. And you should have received an email that shows you instructions on how to get to that packet inside the MAPE portal. So that is where you would find the information for everything that would be DA, is on the DA webpage at mape.org. And if you have questions on seeking that out, please send them to Megan or myself, and we can direct you to the materials that you need to make informed decisions. Another question that came in was, when will the final revision be posted on the website? And weren't resolutions supposed to be finalized by 7/17? The 7/17 deadline was the date to submit resolutions. It was not a finalized date. So there's a process that resolutions have to go through in order to get to where they are right now and to be viewed by the delegates. And those have been posted for, I want to say, a couple of weeks, if not a full month already. So those are on the DA website as well.
I think they were asking specifically about the final draft of this one. So Michael, do you anticipate any further revisions to this resolution?
No substantive ones, like changing what the resolution does. I might update like the casualty counts. Maybe like the I think I saw Sunday a different number that the anti-war committee put out for how the dollar amount of these assets. I might update that, but it would be like informational updates, not substantive ones. Like the goal of the resolution will remain the same
Got
to
it.
the delegate assembly.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this resolution?
One is, should delegates seek additional feedback from their MAPE members on this resolution?
Yes,
Always.
always.
And there was one last question saying, is there, from Christopher, sorry, is there a divestment plan?
So yeah, like I said, the resolution doesn't outline every single company we should divest from. It establishes criteria. It says if you provide material support or you commission kind of human rights violations and violations of international law, that's what we want to seek to divest from. There have been a lot of complaints in the last few years at Delegate Assembly about like getting too much into minutia and kind of losing the bigger picture. So this is a big picture resolution. we want to leave the really technical minutia to committees that are kind of better suited to handle that than 150 people. 150 people is a good broad deliberative democracy. You know, you can have views from lots of different people. At the same time, you know, we have an agenda. There are a lot of things to tackle at delegate assembly, and we want to respect people's times and their attention. So yeah, there's not a specific list of divestment targets or something like that. But we established this committee, this task force that would work with the board of directors and the executive committee to kind of finalize specific details. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Michael. I think we have time for one more question and then we'll move on to the other resolutions.
John asks in the Q&A, has this been reviewed by MSRS and what would be the financial impact on the pension be?
So this has been a demand that is longstanding and much bigger than our union. You know, lots of different union members across the state have testified at the SBI that we want to see our pensions not invested in kind of the war machine. So those communications have been ongoing. They at this point have not been particularly receptive to those concerns, largely because it's individual union members going up there. Unions by and large have not come out one way or another. So, you know, they'll listen to our, you know, thoughts and ideas, but they've been very reluctant to kind of provide a formal kind of like procedure or proposal that they would support. So the point of the resolution is just to organize our members to kind of unify or build consensus around like what we want our moral values to be and, you know, how we want to see those values implemented in the SBI's investment strategy. So this resolution is about what should MATE do. We don't really have control over what the SBI should do. So we're looking to build consensus within MATE and talk to other unions and get their take as well before the SBI ultimately does or does not decide to do something. The financial impact is more complicated, but I want to be specific that divestment doesn't mean we're just like dumping, you know, all this money into a hole or whatever. It means that the assets that we're currently invested in, we would sell, and then from the money that we get from selling it, it would be invested in other assets. So if those other assets grew more rapidly than the investments that we seek to divest from, it could have a positive impact on the pension. If those new investments don't do as well as weapons companies and Israeli bonds, which I think is very much debatable, it could impact the financial position of the pension. But we don't know in advance because, again, we haven't drawn up specific companies. I've done a little bit of work kind of tracking some of the stock prices of these weapons companies, and by and large, they do more poorly than average, you know, tech and manufacturing companies. But that is constantly changing because markets change every day.
All right, thank you, Michael. We're going to move on to the next resolution, but if there's time at the end and you can stick around with us, Michael, we'll get back to some questions that still remain in the Q&A. I just want to make sure we have time for all the resolutions that we have. But thanks to you for presenting that resolution and for the conversation following. The next resolution is increased funding for locals. This resolution was not passed by any groups or committees. The lead authors are Ted Snaza and Ronald Dixon. They're both here, so whomever is going to speak and present this resolution, go ahead and unmute yourself and let us know what you're trying to do here.
Okay, so we're doing, so this one and the next one, you should say, I believe they're back to back, are intertwined. Increasing funding for locals and recapturing unspent local funds. They work together in tandem, but they both can work on their own. So I'll explain. Over the last 8 to 12 years, some other people have brought forth the idea of recapturing local funds. I thought there was merit to it, but it wasn't a fully hashed out process. And so I've spent the time talking to local leaders and trying to come up with a plan, multiple resolutions or paths, what have you, policies that will help get this done. So let me start by saying that over the past 10 plus years, our cost of living has increased. Our dues have now been increased twice, but local funding has only increased by 30 cents. Lately, there's been an increased focus on local funds and that those funds should be spent, all of it spent, on member recruitment and member engagement at the local level. Why is there a renewed focus on this? Because there's over $1.6 million in unspent local funds. So why is that bad? Well, the money given to each local should be spent on their members that fiscal year, so the members who give their money to dues get some of their money back in local engagement. In short, when you're in a local for that year, you should have the money spent on you during that year. This money it needs to be spent on recruitment and engagement, and this hasn't been happening. And our membership has dropped 10% in the last 5 years. So why has this been happening? Well, locals have become very frugal and become more and more conservative in their spending because they've been worried about running out of funds in the current year, saving for the beginning of the next fiscal year, and saving for strike efforts and support. Since locals are still being frugal, we need to figure out a way to get that to stop. So the ideas in this resolution and the next one, they will fund all locals fully on January 1st, removing the need to worry about saving for the beginning of the year. They will increase local funds, so they won't worry about saving for the end of the year and worry about not having enough money for your creative ideas to engage your members, like holding special events or giving out rewards and recognition. And finally, it'll put money, potentially a lot of money, into the Strike Crisis Fund, which is one of the main ways we can grow and show our power. In addition to that, MAPE Central is supposed to control the crisis fund distribution process anyway. Local funds shouldn't be used for that at all. We don't want locals spending their time and energy on worrying about distributing funds during crisis events. MAPE Central should be dealing with the policies and the bylaws and the distribution of funds and the coordinating of strike efforts. So how do you get locals to do all this? Well, besides giving them more money, you need to change their mindset. You need to shift the paradigm. There needs to be a psychological shift in locals regarding how they spend their money, what they spend it on, and that they need to spend it on those two things, recruitment and engagement itself. So the purpose of these two resolutions in tandem will give more locals money so they won't be worried about it. And if they don't use it, it goes to the crisis fund. So it's a win-win. Now they both can work, like I said, on their own. And maybe it doesn't have to be $4 per local, but it needs to be enough money where locals no longer worry about having funds and they know and are re-encouraged to spend as much as they can, more if they can. If they end up running out, they can always come to the board or the finance work group and request more money. That has been in place, but no one's ever used it because no one runs out of money. It's a rare occurrence. I can go into more details and ramble on further, but I feel like there's probably a few questions out there.
Ted, do you want to thanks for walking through that. I appreciate it. Do you want to take questions for both of those resolutions at the same time?
Absolutely. And actually, let me quickly explain the reason I split those two apart was because of delegate assembly last year, where there was a resolution for term limits and term length, and the delegate assembly itself decided to split that question apart and deal with them separately. So I figured rather than having to go through that whole rigmarole again, I just split them separately myself, but they're intended to work together.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we'll take questions for both of these resolutions at the same time. So what we're displaying on the screen now is the second resolution that Ted is talking about. The first one is increasing local funding, and this next one is the unspent local funds recaptured. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. And Suzanne, do we have any questions?
Not right now.
Okay.
Hopefully that means everybody's been attending the last resolution forums.
No questions.
Okay. Well, thank you for a very thorough presentation, Ted. Thorough enough that people didn't even have any remaining questions. We will move on to the next one, but if you're able to stick around with us and some questions come up, we can take them at the end if we have time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks again. Oh, here we go. We have a
One
question.
question came in. Axelina asked if the increase passes, but not the local budget being limited, that could cause some serious financial constraints. How do you plan to address that?
So the financial constraints wouldn't be an issue for the 2025 year since the budget would already be passed. We would just have to, at the finance work group, figure out where to spend them. We have discussed this in the past, so it has been an issue that was brought up and we did discuss it. It would be an issue or something that we'd have to look at for the 2026 budget. So local funding increase would have to be accounted for in the 2026 budget plan. 2025 would have already been passed by the delegate assembly, which is why the resolution change after that wouldn't affect it.
Okay, thanks, Ted. Did any other questions come in? Okay, well, thanks for taking that one on. We'll take some more questions at the end if we have time, but let's move on to our next resolution. Thanks again, Ted. This next resolution is seeks to dissolve the nominations committee. This was endorsed by the board of directors. The lead authors are Ted Snaza, Ronald Dixon, and Jackie Blogsvet. I don't know which one of you will speak on behalf of this resolution, but whomever it is, please go ahead and unmute yourself and walk us through your resolution.
Thank you, Megan. It's Jackie. I'll be speaking on behalf of this resolution, just to help everyone keep them separate, keep the other resolutions separate that that Ronald and Ted have presented. So we have here just something that we're trying to kind of clean up in our election rules. And one thing about the delegate assembly is it is the only governing body that can change MAPE's election rules. So that is why the board has endorsed this this change because we do. I am a member of the board of directors, and the board supports this change. It makes sense. It kind of cleans up some things in our budgeting process. And it is kind of an old, like a dinosaur, right? Something that used to be important, but is no longer important because of the way that our nominations process has changed with the election rules change that we the delegate assembly passed in, I think, the fall of 22, when we actually dissolved local nominations committees and had a process that increased our transparency of our nominations process. So now you can, as any MAPE member, you can log into our elections committee portion of our webpage, and you can kind of track who's been nominated for which open positions when the nominations period is open for elections. And that has really increased our filling of open spots and has increased like our being able to look at as member leaders where there are spots that need to be filled with nominations before the election or before the nominations period closes. So what you have in front of you, we have our reasons. The nominations committee hasn't been funded for many years, so it is something that used to be funded to pay members for lost time so that they could do statewide nominations for statewide positions that were going to be open in that coming election cycle. But because of this transparency and the system that we've created, we find that we no longer need to fund the nominations committee, and we haven't seated anyone in that committee for a long time. And we have this this blank spot in our budget process where we would actually just like to get rid of that row and no longer need to budget to fund that work anymore. So what else? Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Thanks. And you can just see here that this is the change takes place in 2 locations in our bylaws and then also in our our elections rules. So while the MAPE Board of Directors could have changed the bylaws, we needed to maybe like pass this all at one time and change the bylaws and our election rules at the same time. So that's why we're bringing it to the Delegate Assembly. And there you have it. So here this just says that the statewide election committee will be appointed per the bylaws. And so there will no longer be a requirement to appoint a nominations committee at all. So any questions?
Okay, thanks, Jackie.
Mhm.
Do we have any questions on this resolution?
None yet.
Okay. Seems like this one's pretty straightforward and the board's endorsement maybe helps some folks. So I don't think we have any questions on this one. But again, for this one, if they do come up and we have time at the end, we'll take those questions if you're able to stick around with us.
You got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, let's move on. The next one is the issue of the 32-hour work week. This one started out as a resolution and moved into an addition to the legislative agenda. So this will not be voted on during delegate assembly as a resolution, but it is included in the legislative agenda where delegates will vote on it as a package with the legislative agenda. So you'll have an opportunity to learn more about the 32-hour workweek campaign during tabling at delegate assembly, and we also have time for a presentation from this group during the assembly. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Barbara Monaco and provide some more details about this campaign. Hey, Barbara.
Hello, afternoon. So thank you all so much for giving me the time here. We proposed adding language to the legislative agenda in support of basically reduced work hours, specifically the 32-hour work week, and setting that as a legislative priority so that we can basically have lobby time from MAPE and be able to have that as an item to champion. We are currently working on getting signatures from MAPE represented employees for the state to say how much they would or would not like to support this initiative. And we have broken 2,000 signatures. And we will be giving a presentation to talk more about what this campaign is, why we think we can win it, and why we think that this particular topic is hot to trot, so to speak, at this moment in time. And there is a growing national movement to basically take back our time. And this is an ongoing effort by labor to continue to take back our time, which is a valuable resource, just as valuable as pay, just as valuable as other benefits granted to us, if not more so in this current time.
Okay. Well, thanks, Barbara. That was a very speedy presentation with a lot more to come during delegate assembly. So
that's why I get to do it fast now. It's like, hey, come see us then. It's a teaser. We'll also be tabling too. So thank you for everyone that's giving us the opportunity both to present as well as to table during the delegate assembly. So come get some sweet swag. We'll have some buttons.
Awesome. Thanks so much for walking through that for us and for being here today. We have a little bit of extra time, so let's go back and see if there's any remaining questions on any of the resolutions. Oh, yeah.
So there are a few remaining questions from earlier resolutions. This one from Ariel was for the divestment resolution for Michael. She asked, is this something that would be better brought up to members? If one of the benefits of paying dues is to vote, perhaps this could be something to send to members.
I'm not opposed to that, but I don't believe there is a process within MAPE bylaws for a popular referendum on something. So short of that process existing, what I would suggest is, yes, you should talk to your members about this. As delegates or as directors from your region, you're elected to make decisions on behalf of your members. So I think it's important to have that engagement and make sure that, you know, whatever way you decide, you've decided after You've had lots of engagement, you've had questions answered, you've communicated with your members kind of about the stakes of not just my resolution, but any of our resolutions. The Delegate Assembly is the most democratic body that MAPE has. I believe the only really popular election process is for election of statewide officers. I could be wrong about that. So if Megan or one of the business agents knows better, please correct me. But yeah, so our intent is we want this in the Delegate Assembly because that's the widest forum that we have for popular engagement. But individual members of the Delegate Assembly should certainly talk to their members about their votes. I fully support that. Yes.
Thanks, Michael. Are there any other questions?
Yes, Tanya had two questions. One was, again, for the divestment resolution. That one was, did you talk with the SBI to see what the financial scope of your current divestment request would be? What would be left for members to invest in?
I think I explained the interactions that I've personally had with the SBI so far. I do want to answer kind of the second part of that question. What's left to invest in is anything else in the world. There are thousands of US companies, public companies that could be invested in. There's bonds from essentially every government in the world. So yeah, I mean, the resolution's not going to spell out this is what we should invest in after we divest, because that's the legal authority of the State Board of Investment. They have the authority to decide what to choose to invest in. And so the purpose of the resolution from our perspective is we want to communicate to the SBI that if the resolution does pass, that we would like a investment strategy that incorporates issues of human rights.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Do we have more questions?
Yes, Tanya's follow-up question or a secondary question for the divestment one was your resolution is broader than just weapons companies and Israeli bonds. Are there plans to change the resolution?
So this is, I'm glad this question was asked. You are correct that the language used in kind of the second part of the resolution where it says what we should do is broader than just listing Israeli bonds and weapons companies. It provides a framework for kind of consistently holding the position of advancing human rights. So this is the Israeli-Gaza war is the kind of motivation that people have really cared about as an issue to be addressed. But I think for the sake of our union, it's best that we not necessarily single out one specific country, but to hold kind of a consistent position anytime there's human rights violations. Kind of the example I think of is during the Trump administration, the US government supported Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, which featured a lot of the same kind of human rights violations that we see in Gaza. That war has since ended, but it's an example of we would also, or at least speaking for myself, I would also like to see us not support that kind of thing. Regardless of which country is violating human rights, I think our principled position should be the same for any of them. It shouldn't just be Israel. It should be anytime, our pension funds are being used to contribute to war and violence, we should have a say over that. So right now, the language of the resolution does and is meant to only impact those kind of two assets I talked about. But if a future war came up, I think we should have the same position about that. So yeah, the goal is not to single out Israel and say Israel is the only bad thing happening or is the only bad country in the world. It's to say this is the example that people care about. This is what's leading to all of these demonstrations and marches and protests and all this sort of thing that are happening right now. But my belief is we should be consistent about that across the board.
Okay, thanks again, Michael. Any other questions?
Yeah, earlier Jason had a question for the resolution, the twin resolutions from Ted and Ronald. And his question was, if the resolution to recapture local funds passes, Would the money be recaptured on December 31st, 2024? If so, would there be a grace period for locals with a balance, an opportunity to spend funds throughout the next year? Or two, my concern is that since DA is at the end of October, locals would only have 2 months to spend funds, which could be difficult.
Thank you for the question. There's a few answers, but basically it depends. As it is written, the funds would be recaptured as of the end of December. But if the delegate assembly voted to suspend the standing rules, then they could amend the resolution, make a motion and amend it so that that wouldn't happen, or they could put other guidelines on there. When it comes to the funding for the locals next year, the finance work group would have their opportunity to figure that out. They may take some of those funds to help fund it. I'm not exactly sure because we don't know what's going to happen with the resolutions, what the members will decide. You are correct, though, in that, in theory, all of that money that is saved up would then be recaptured and put into the crisis fund. So you would have to come up with a way to spend it if you didn't want it to go to the crisis fund. But my first question would be, what's the harm in it going to the crisis fund? And the other question or statement, I guess, would be, is that sort of the point of the first resolution to increase that funding considerably so that if all that money does get taken, guess what? It's replenished the next year as much, if not more, than what was in your savings.
All right, thanks, Ted. I think we have time for one more question if there is one.
Yeah, Jackie asked in the chat, I have a process question. How can a campaign like the 32-hour work week make it to MAPE's political agenda and have time for a presentation at the delegate assembly, but the ceasefire campaign not have the same opportunity?
I could answer that one briefly. Michael or Barbara, feel free to weigh in also, if you'd like. The 32-hour work week group started with a resolution and brought their request to the political council, which voted to add it to the legislative agenda. So it turned into their time on the agenda turned into an informational presentation rather than debate over a resolution. I don't know, Michael or Barbara, if you want to add anything.
I'll just say one more thing. There is a tabling session at delegate assembly where the ceasefire caucus will be present at that tabling session. We will have a table and we hope to interact with people one-on-one there. There's other tables, political council last year had one, as I recall, but there will be opportunities for these discussions and for informational purposes. That's kind of the forum that we will be present at. And then the debate itself will happen on the resolution separately.
Okay, there's some other, I'm told there's some other questions in the Q&A kind of about process or how to explain this information to locals. I would encourage, if you have questions about them, to reach out to the resolution authors and talk about them so that you feel prepared as delegates to talk with people in your local about it. And if you do have remaining questions that you didn't get into the Q&A, please reach out to those resolution authors again. Make sure that your questions are answered before we get to delegate assembly and before we do any voting. You can find the resolutions posted on the webpage, and the contact information for the authors is included in each one of those resolutions. So I want to kind of wrap this up here and just say thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us, to the resolution authors for being here to talk about the changes that they would like to see, and for we had about 100 members here asking questions on what they'll be voting on. And I think you all being here, people bringing their ideas, makes our union stronger. So I'm really glad that we could make time for this leading up to delegate assembly. So thank you all again, and I look forward to seeing you on the upcoming forums and then ultimately at delegate assembly. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.